It's the Fulhamish podcast, your independent voice of Fulham FC. My name's Sammy James. Welcome to the show. Today, we're going to be looking ahead to Fulham's easy victory against Manchester City on Saturday, where we're going to make it 3 wins out of 3, a title tussle for the ages. Absolute scandal they've not put this one on Super Sunday. Also, we'll do the final word on our victory against Nottingham Forest on Saturday. We've got some emails and an exceptional, I have heard, this will catch on at the end. I'm joined by Jack Collins. Hello.
Hello, Sammy. How you doing?
Good, thank you. Nice to be back.
Yeah, it's good to be back in studio. Nice week off last week for you. Did you have a good time?
I had a lovely time. I was in France, a place near Carcassonne, which was stunning. Great pod with Henry. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. It was great having him on.
He went a bit two-footed on Raul Jimenez, but I like opinions.
Yeah, I rated it. He came in, he backed his own source. That's all you can ask for, really, isn't it?
100%. And we are joined by Peter Rutzler from The Athletic. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Sammy. Hello, Jack. How are we doing?
Good, thanks.
Bad, thank you.
Nice to have you back, mate.
Yeah, it's nice to be on. Back part of the furniture on a Thursday.
Yeah.
Well, it's Wednesday, but Thursday, spiritually.
Exactly. How are things with you? Been busy, Fulhaming, PSGing?
Yeah. It's been good. Obviously there's been a lot going on. Yesterday was at the Emirates for Arsenal PSG, which, as we were just talking about before the pod, it had the feel of that big Champions League game, but then, because it's so early and then the game finishes and you think, actually, how much did this mean? And it doesn't quite have the same sort of, fantastic result. But a very clear example of how PSG are quite a long way behind Arsenal at these in this moment in time. So, but fun night. Good game.
Are you enjoying the new Champions League?
Me or Peter?
Well, I'm both of you, but Jack?
I don't mind the format. I think it will heat up. But I do understand why people are looking at these and thinking early dead rubbers. But equally, I think that part of it is that no one's quite sure how it's going to play out yet. So everyone's playing their first choice 11s. And we saw Borussia Dortmund hammer Celtic yesterday. We saw Bayern Munich win 9-2 in the first week. I don't think that's because suddenly there is more or less jeopardy. I think it's because everyone's not sure how this works yet. So therefore I can't really rotate. And so everyone is just racking up these scorelines early on to see what goal difference does, etc. I think it will get better. I don't mind it as a concept, but equally I do appreciate it. And I think for match travelling fans, getting to go to different, an extra play at stadium away, getting different clubs coming to your stadium, that's cool.
Yeah.
So I don't hate it as much as everybody else seems to, but I do appreciate this taking a little bit of time to get going.
Peter?
Yeah, I like the variation. I like the variation with the different games, the different opponents, as Jack was saying. You do wonder once we get towards December, January time, and it's still ongoing, and most positions have been decided. How that's going to feel. It was the same with the group stages, though. You're trying to squeeze in a league format to a competition that is popular because of its knockout format. Fundamentally, that's why those are the big games, right? And these are just means to earn more money. I do think that said, for the smaller teams, it's great. Obviously, Stade Brestois won 2 games, they're in the Champions League debut season, and obviously Celtic had a decent start before facing Dortmund last night, and so maybe it'll help some of the other teams, and that would be a good thing, but ultimately we're just going to end up in the same place by the knockouts, so
yeah.
Let's see, I guess. Let's see.
I'm just asking because obviously we need to start fact finding for next season.
Yeah.
Where from a Fulham perspective. No, I do like it, and I enjoy that both match days we've had good matchups, and it feels like a reason to play. We had Liverpool AC Milan in the first weekend. I enjoyed watching Arsenal PSG last night. I just think there's too many. I think if they'd have managed to make it 32 teams and there were 6 games each, I think it would have been grand. I like the differing opponents and it not being just going home and away and stuff like that. I just think if you could somehow get it down to 6 per team rather than 8 per team, that'd be fantastic. But we know that's not going to happen, and the only reason for that is money, and broadcasters aren't going to be happy with fewer matches.
From a viewing perspective, it's only actually 1 extra game per night. So like it does kind of shake itself out in that kind of regard.
But it's
eight,
two extra games back in January, and it just feels like the end of the group stage is a long way off.
I think it should be done before Christmas, I'll be honest.
Yeah. Anyway, good to fact find for next season, because we are in the top 6, and even if we don't quite make the Champions League, there is the Europa League to consider. Jack, your thoughts on the win in Nottingham on Saturday? It was pretty ugly, really. Yeah. Like, it wasn't a match for the ages at all. It was decided on a bit of a weird penalty, but I don't think that was by accident. I think Fulham went up there with a game plan to make it ugly and played it out pretty perfectly. A few hairy moments, few moments of getting away with it slightly. You can't, plan to win a penalty like that and see out the whole match. But ultimately, we deserve a lot of credit, I feel like, for getting the job done. A difficult place to go and an unbeaten team.
Yeah, I think we were slightly the better team, but there wasn't much in it because neither team were particularly brilliant. But equally, I think it's interesting to see how Marco Silva went about this. And we talked about Fulham looking really good in transition at times this season. And actually, the way that the Newcastle game played out and the way that shook out was Fulham actually finding ways to just cut through Newcastle at will. It wasn't like Fulham were completely ball dominant. They were more ball dominant than they were against Forest. But we saw what Forest did when they went to Anfield, right? And just let Liverpool have the ball and set up in order to try and soak that up and get their one moment, which they took. And that was a very impressive win in that regard, even if Liverpool were the better team.
Yeah,
I think Fulham were like, well, we're not going to do that. We're absolutely not going to come here, knock the ball around the back and wait for you to counter us. I also think that Nuno got this desperately wrong, and that's fine because you can only take advantage of what's in front of you. But I didn't think that the two strikers up top worked together for Forest. I didn't think they had any real width until they decided to eventually bring Callum Hudson-Odoi and Anthony Elanga on. It all felt like it really played into Fulham's hands. And whilst Fulham, as you say, weren't absolutely brilliant, it was more than enough, I thought, to just sort of keep them at arm's length. I wasn't unduly worried throughout the game, keeping an eye on it and seeing what was happening. There was no point where I was like, oh God, we're right under the cosh here. In a way that actually, weirdly, considering the Newcastle result was a better result and a better performance, I think, in general, there were moments in that game where I was head in hands, but like, we're going to throw this, we're going to somehow contrive to lose this. I didn't really feel like that, Forest.
No, there was no real massive panic. Even the 8 minutes of added time, there was nothing I was too concerned about. Feels like Fulham have got a bit more streetwise. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Peter, obviously, you can have a bit of a longer view on this as you haven't been on in a while. It feels to me like we've only just got started, really. I'm not even 100% sure Fulham have found top gear yet, and yet we're in 6th. Like it feels like only a couple of weeks ago we were lamenting West Ham and not being able to hold on. 2 wins later, and suddenly, we're looking very healthy in the table. Obviously, it's early days. Let's not get carried away. I am joking about all the Europe stuff, but I don't know. Just it's like, all right, is that how you do it? Just win a couple of games and suddenly you're in 6th. Like, beautiful.
Yeah, I think if we think back to the start of the season and when we were talking about the early fixtures, there was a little bit of trepidation about them, just on the basis that you're facing the newly promoted sides early. Obviously, a very difficult opening game. It was very easy, considering the changes that have happened, at Motspur Park this summer, for this to be. So, I think in that context, considering who is left, to be in 6th at this point, with it's 11 points on the board now, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's mightily impressive. It shouldn't be a surprise because we've seen, Fulham under Marco Silva consistently confound expectations. But I think last season in particular, losing Mitrovic, and then this season losing Palhinha and Willian, to have found a pretty settled team. It's quite unusual that I think Fulham have only made 2 changes to the starting lineup this season, and that was I can't remember which game that was. It was the 4th game of the season, so it would have been
Joachim Anderson, one of them,
and Raul Jimenez for Muniz.
Yeah, and that's it. Those have been the only changes from game to game, and Fulham lost key players, but we haven't seen all of them. Obviously, we haven't seen much of Sanderberger yet, but Marco Silva's talked about him needing time to get up to match fitness because he had a disruptive pre-season at Burnley. But to be that settled, I think that's really helped. I think Sasa Lukic playing well, just quietly performing consistently in that deep role, which is where all the scrutiny was going to be once Palhinha left. For Smith Rowe to come in and start scoring and assisting early, it's made a really big difference. It just feels like the squad, it sort of moved forward and progressed in a really well thought out kind of way. You look at the development of, say, Adama Traore and the mixed season he had last year. Yes, he had injuries, but we could see him building towards the back end of last season with his cameos from the bench. To then have that in pre-season, to see him then take that next step and play every game, and it's become quite an essential piece in the puzzle. The same with Lukic as another example, stepping in. That continuity, I think, is really important. And and I know you guys are talking about it, I know it's been spoken about on the pod, but the defence has certainly been fantastic. I think the strength there, having that so settled so quickly, Joachim Andersen really does look like a real game changer of a signing, not just for Fulham, because you only have to look at Palace to see how disruptive his departure has been. It's made for a really positive start, but I think you're right, Sammy, not to go too far with it, because these are early days. These are kind of, I don't want to say points you expect to win. Fulham have lost just once from their first 6 games. It's the longest unbeaten run in the Premier League, isn't it now? So
yeah.
It is pretty damn good, but I don't want to say you expect them to get, because that's not kind of right, but you kind of do, because it's Fulham under Silva, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, you think back to the start of the season, and Jack Kelly came on this pod, and his hot take was that Fulham would be unbeaten until Man City away. Now, he looked a bit daft when that went out the window at Man United, but actually he was fairly spot on. But I think a lot of us had seen this run and thought, well, we should have a good start here. And maybe because the actual first 3 games was a little bit underwhelming, it felt like, all right, well, Fulham's good start's out the window. But we've kind of made up for it with the last 2 results. It's not exactly like this is a huge shock to me. It is weird to see Fulham up so high up the table.
Sure, but that might be as much to do with other teams than it is, to do with us. We can only beat the teams in front of us. And I think that there is a point to be made here that so far, Newcastle aside, these are pretty much the points you would have expected, right? You might have expected 3 at Portman Road, but I think that you're kind of looking at this setup, maybe we're 2 or 3 points ahead of schedule, if you will. You would have expected to lose to United, fair enough. Would expect to beat Leicester at home. We might have expected to...
You say expect us to lose to United. That's looking like the worst result of the season.
Sure,
by a mile.
But I think if you just literally did this on paper before the season began, right? You kind of then look at it and think, well, we maybe would have expected to beat Ipswich away from home. So we're 2 points behind schedule there. A draw against West Ham is probably about right, you would have expected.
Yeah.
And then the Newcastle one is 3 points, so you're sort of +1 there, and maybe you would have expected a draw at Forest. So let's say we'll add another 2 on for that. So you're sort of 3 points ahead of schedule. If Fulham had 8 points at this point, I think we'd all be like, yeah, it's pretty bang on for where the start was. So I think it is important. Well, it's not that important not to get carried away, because football's about getting carried away, right? And we should enjoy this while we can. But I do think there is a sense of, and I think your point stands here, that's really interesting, is that I don't think Fulham have got going. I don't think Fulham have found their rhythm yet. I don't think the midfield balance has quite worked itself out. I still think that there are players to come into this side, the likes of Reece Nelson potentially on that side, and how that shifts around, that potentially has the option of moving this Fulham side forward. It doesn't quite feel like everything's gelled yet. And that, I think, is the most exciting part about this start, because actually, if you'd said to me 6 games in, you're going to be saying Fulham haven't really gelled yet, I'd be like, ooh, that could be a bit tricky. But actually, Fulham are coasting along just fine. And the amount of daylight, and this is it for me, and Drew wrote about this in his BBC Sport column this week, about how Claudio Ranieri, the year that Leicester won the title, no comparisons, just so we're clear, but
we're in the league.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Can't wait.
But he kept talking about getting to 40 points, right? He was like 40 points first and foremost. And actually, for me, it's not necessarily about the number of points anymore. And I know Elizabeth wrote her piece about, having, getting the right points at the right time, etc. For me, it's not about that. It's about daylight between Fulham and the relegation scrap. And what I always say coming into these campaigns is, let's stay away from the vortex. Let's stay away from even the idea, the concept that we could get dragged in by an injury derailment or a couple of bad results or a suspension come March, April. The bigger that gap is, the happier I am. And right now that gap looks pretty massive, and that's good enough for me.
Well, we're 10 points ahead of the bottom 2, 8 points to the bottom 3. I mean, it's been a weird season, hasn't it? With so many sides winless in the league. And Peter, actually, it's easy to look at Fulham as a stable club in the Premier League. But I know that Marco, a lot over the summer, kind of kept banging the drum, didn't he? That it's been a really disruptive pre-season. He talked about, I think there was one press conference where he said he felt that Fulham had the most key players depart the club, and I feel like that was a bit of a arguable claim, some other clubs, but he pointed out the obvious ones: Polina, Willian, Decadova-Reid, Tim Ream. I think he genuinely put in that kind of bracket as well, even though
leadership, right?
Yeah, but he's had a lot to deal with, and for us to be picking up these wins, even if they're a little bit ugly, if they're a little bit skin of our teeth in terms of both the last two, really, I think Silva deserves so much credit for what he's done here. The transformation of Lukic, like, my God, it's revolutionary.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, we shouldn't underplay it as well, because those changes are really significant, and Marco Silva's mentioned it a couple of times in press conferences, and I think there's an element of making sure you're covering your back a bit, and also expectation management. But it's also true, like, everyone sort of anticipated Fulham to really struggle without Polina. It was seen as, the Polina signing is the backbone of the team. That's what's made the difference. But as you say, Lukic has come in and made a real impression. And, I think for watchers of Fulham every week, we kind of knew it wouldn't fall off a cliff like that, because Lukic and Reid showed the end of last season that as a pair that they can work quite well. Obviously, I think Lukic and Pereira is slightly more unexpected. And I agree with Jack. I think that's still got some more evolutions to turn.
Oh, you're joining his Andres Pereira fan club?
No, well, I've always been a fan of Andres and what he brings. I think we know what he brings off the ball, and I don't want to get into that debate again. But I expect, and he's played in this role before, and I'm not fully convinced. I'm not wholly convinced by the balance here at the moment. He's had some good games and then some not so good games. But aside from that, you've also lost Willian, who's the team's most creative player and has had a major impact from that left hand side. I think everyone kind of expected there to be change, and I think the last press conference I was at was that's been pre-West Ham, I think, and I was asking him about the window and how he felt it had gone, and he said they felt recruited really well, feels defence is really, really strong. There's been a lot of changes, and so I said afterwards, so you think this is a transition season? And he said he didn't really want to use that word. He didn't want to use the word transition, because he wants to make the club grow, and and you get that with Silva, because he's quite ambitious and he wants things now, right? He's not really. I think there's a wider topic actually about him and the work at Fulham, but he's trying to improve and make those steps forward for the here and now, and I think to do that within this context, because I think you could easily have turned around and said, yeah, I think this is a bit of a transition, because it would be from the summer that Fulham have had, but they've brought in the right players, and I think that should also not be overlooked, because we talked about who Fulham target, how they've done it. I mean, we talk about the long-running Andre, saga, and opting instead for Berger, who's got Premier League experience, that key trait for a lot of their recruitment, and just how it makes a difference so quickly. It's we live in a time where everyone's looking for the next best thing and things like that. But for Fulham, it's about knitting things together quickly, and that's what Marco Silva wants. That's clearly what the club are sort of buying into, and it's working. And I think signings like Smith Rowe, Anderson, I like Nelson as well. I agree with Jack from the bits I've seen. It seems like he might really thrive in having a quite clearly defined role and clearly defined responsibilities, which you may not always get if you're a bit part player in a bigger team. But all those factors come together to make what I think could easily have been actually, this season is going to be really difficult. And it may have ended up like that if results hadn't been so positive. But to actually come through and to be playing like this, I think it really is. It is very, very impressive. It's a joint best start to the Premier League season of 6 games.
Yeah.
It's really impressive.
Yeah, 02-03 and 03-04. 0-3 ended up being a real. That wasn't comfortable in the end, the way Fulham survived that season. But if we can emulate 0-3-0-4, which
that'd be good.
I always remember
when you started those numbers there, Sammy, I thought you were going to start a phone in. I thought, what's going on here? Is this a new segment? I drove free. Oh, like, bloody hell. Okay, here we go.
The Fulhamish phone in. Give us your thoughts.
That's old school.
Text win to 60 No, I'm joking. 0-3-0-4. I always remember we beat Southampton 2-0 on Boxing Day to go 4th.
Yes.
If we can emulate a bit of then we sold Louis
Saha and it all went down the pan.
But he did pay for the Hammersmith end that we still sit in now. We will always...
Cheers, Louis.
Thank you, Louis. It's a great stand. It was great at the time.
Louis, could you bring back some more money and we could do the toilets?
Yeah, that'd be really good, Louis, if you've got some money down the back of the sofa. One interesting thing, Jack, that I feel like was overlooked a bit. They did discuss it on the podcast on Sunday, but I think because he scored, it became less of an issue than it could have had he not scored, was the kind of argument between Pereira for the penalty. Marco afterwards said that Jimenez should not have taken the penalty. There is some confusion as to whether Andreas could have taken the penalty.
Yeah, I don't think he can. I don't think he's legally allowed to kick the ball.
Because he was taken off injured.
Yeah, he has to stay off for 30 seconds and the ball's gone effectively dead, right? So I actually don't think that Andreas would have been allowed to take the penalty anyway. Or at least shouldn't have been.
But then why is Marco in arms? Unless Marco didn't realise the rule.
Yeah, maybe or
hadn't figured.
I could be wrong. I'll be honest.
Yeah, I wasn't 100% sure, but I've seen conflicting things about it. But
I don't think once you're off injured, you're allowed to come back on to take a set piece. I don't believe that's the case. You have to wait until the ball is in play and the ref summons you back on. Now, whether that's a sensible rule or not is probably a different argument for a different time. But I don't think Pereira should be allowed to come back on to take the penalty. I think he's just sneaked on. He's just kind of wandered back on in the kind of the marauder of it all, right? The melee. So weird in that regard. It's a strange one. Obviously Marco was Andreas is the penalty taker, he should take penalties. Also, it was Raul's 50th Premier League goal. Felt like a real opportunity.
Sentimentality shouldn't come into it though at this point.
But we're pretty confident with Raul as a penalty taker. To be honest, I'd be pretty confident with either of those standing over the ball.
Yeah.
But I'm always less confident over a penalty once people have an argument over it.
Yeah.
As soon as there's an argument, I'm well, someone's now going to, it doesn't matter who takes it, they're going to miss. Because the pressure ramps up about 27 times. There's one thing having the pressure from the home end, the away end, everyone giving it large, keeper. It's another thing when one of your players on your team is basically hope he misses, so I'll get the next one. That's not good for morale. So Marco swept under the carpet pretty quickly. He said that Andreas should take it. Andreas is the designated penalty taker, but it's going to be fine. I mean, I suppose they're both looking for goals in different ways. Andreas is trying to kind of get his season on track in that kind of regard. Raul looking to kind of make his mark as the main striker. You can probably spin a positive off that if you want, but I didn't enjoy seeing it.
No, it was a little bit of an odd situation, but as you say, it doesn't get the eyeballs, does it, when it goes in?
No.
Not like Abu Kamara and Alexander Mitrovic.
Oh, honestly, I'm still completely and utterly devastated by that entire thing.
Iconic game.
We did win.
We did win, just. No thanks to Abu Kamara and Mitrovic's little spat on the pitch. To be honest, Abu Kamara, in hindsight, had probably just watched Mitrovic's penalties and thought, that man is absolutely terrible.
Also, did you see a stat today? This is completely off the tangent, but there's a stat today that Alexander Mitrovic had racked up the highest speed yesterday in a game for Al Hilal. I thought he was going over there to just, crack on with semi-retirement. He's absolutely he's never looked fitter. He looks unbelievable. He's in incredible shape.
It was the highest speed in the game. That is relative to everyone else that's on the pitch. How quick was everyone else?
Well, I mean, but there were still some pretty quick footballers on that pitch. He racked up 32.3 kilometers an hour at one point or something. That's wild. Alexander Mitrovic.
When I did a background feature for the before the World Cup and went out to Serbia and spoke to some of his old coaches. One of the things they said was that he's not like the player he was today. He was quick. That was his thing. He was quick, and they would play him out wide, and it just felt so incomprehensible and hard to get your head around. I wasn't even sure how to include it because that's just not him and his personality, is it?
Yeah, speedy Alex.
Yeah, exactly. But so maybe he's trying to get back to his roots a bit, mix his game up as he gets on.
Yeah.
He has scored a fair few goals sort of over the top, in and behind the defence, which is never something he did. So when he comes back, it's going to be great to see.
Well, yeah. How long does he need to be out there before he can avoid paying taxes?
I don't know.
I think it's another 6
I've done
months.
a tax piece recently, so I think you have to be outside the UK for a full tax year. So that's from April to April. So if you go midway through a tax year, you then have to wait for the full next tax year.
So next summer.
I can't remember when he left now. So
Last
yes,
summer. Next summer,
yes.
come home.
Next
Good
summer.
stuff.
But also,
Jay Pally back in January on loan, and me during the summer on my cooking.
you also, I think though, and that was Jordan Henderson's big problem, wasn't it? He didn't stay long enough in Saudi Arabia, and part of the contracts when you sign with those Saudi Pro League clubs is like, yeah, it's 300,000 a week or whatever stupid salary you're on, but you do have to invest quite a lot of that back into the Saudi kingdom.
Yeah.
And I think you get a big old, and that's why he couldn't come back to the UK because the whole tax thing, couldn't he? So anyway, we've got
That is a
side
tangent, sorry.
big old tangent, but enjoyable nonetheless. We'll take a break there. Afterwards, we will look ahead to City on Saturday. This episode of Fulhamish is brought to you by NordVPN. NordVPN is a way of watching sporting matches from all around the world just by changing the location on your tablet, your laptop, or your phone. For instance, you can use NordVPN to watch football matches for a fraction of the cost, including those 3 p.m. fixtures that aren't available here in the UK. Plus, you can use NordVPN on up to 10 devices. So, for instance, if my dad goes on holiday to Spain, he can log in using my account, and then he can watch Match of the Day to catch up on those Fulham highlights. Only when Fulham win, of course. Right now, you can get a great deal by signing up for NordVPN at nordvpn.com/Fulhamish. Not only will you get a great rate, but you'll get 4 months extra as well. Plus, it's completely risk-free thanks to NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. So to get that great rate plus 4 extra months, go to nordvpn.com/Fulhamish. That's nordvpn.com/Fulhamish. Part 2 of the Fulhamish podcast. It is Sammy here with Jack and Peter. Let's look ahead then to our trip to the Etihad. No Rodri, no De Bruyne. 3 points for Fulham, Jack.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it kind of doesn't matter, right? We could either get them now by winning, or we'll get them back in January when these charges come through. So one way or another, we're getting these points. I don't, please don't back this or cut it up or whatever, but I've just got a really good feeling about this weekend.
Okay.
And I never have good feelings. I'm famously down and actually very kind of trying to be a realist about Fulham. But I watched City yesterday, and obviously they ended up winning 4-0 against Slovan Bratislava. But the way that they were cut apart in transition in the first half by a team who got absolutely battered by Celtic the week before, who then obviously went and lost 7-1 to Borussia Dortmund, was terrifying. If I was a City fan, I would have been absolutely scared to death. Bratislava should have equalised really, really early on. They sliced through City from a City corner, and it takes about 4 touches to get to the other end of the pitch. And I was watching it going, well, if they leave those kind of spaces for Fulham to exploit, then we're going to have a field day. Because, as we say, and as I said earlier on, transition seems to be something that Fulham are really growing into. Being able to sit deep and actually you grind things out appears to be something that Fulham are leaning into a little bit more, and being able to adapt to teams and change our game plan in order to kind of responds to what they're doing. Now, I might say this, and Fulham might lose 5-0. Might concede really early on, and ultimately, when City get going, they get going. They're a machine. But I do think there is an opportunity here with Rodri out, as you say, with De Bruyne out. And it doesn't mean that the players coming in there are anything less than brilliant. It's going to be either Gundogan or Mateus Nunes or Kovacic. I mean, they're all incredible footballers. But if they leave the gaps that they left yesterday, and maybe that was just City being on the front foot and being it doesn't really matter. They did this last year in the Champions League. They went behind almost to see if they could test themselves. And notably, teams have gone and scored early against City this season and end up losing anyway. But I do wonder if there is a kind of an opportunity here with City a little bit reeling from their 1-1 draw against Newcastle last weekend, a Newcastle side that we were quite comprehensively better than, I should add, that if Fulham actually go in there and frustrate them and actually get that crowd a little bit nervy and all of the things that we know that Fulham are capable of doing, whether they actually execute that or not is a different question. But if that is the case, then I think that there maybe is some joy to be had here. And look, maybe some joy is a 2-1 loss. But ultimately, I do think that having previewed this game for the last sort of 2 seasons and the rest of the times we got them in the Cup and the seasons before that in the Premier League, every time I've been like, there's absolutely no hope whatsoever, home or away, that we're going to get anything off City. I've just got a feeling that this could be the kind of game that Fulham actually really lean into this season. We saw the first year in the Premier League, and this evolution is interesting. The first year in the Premier League, Fulham beat the teams around them and below them and stayed up comfortably. Last season, we were a little bit slippier. The Robin Hood craze that comes up all the time. We actually punched a lot of bigger teams in the face, and actually the little teams we struggle with a little bit. This season, I wonder if we can take that to another level and actually be like, no, we are an incredibly difficult side to play against. We have the capacity to frustrate. We have the capacity to hit you in situations that you don't want to be hit in. We have some differing things going on in terms of the weapons that Fulham have at their disposal. The likes of Adama, the likes of Reece Nelson off the bench change games in different ways. I wonder if there is just something here that we see maybe the full extent of what a Marco Silva tactical plan looks like, whether that works or not.
Yeah. I mean, Peter, I did a preview with the brilliant Man City podcast called Blue Moon and their host, David Mooney. And, he said, what players should I look out for? Kind of standard question that you get asked in those opposition previews. And I mentioned a few and I said, and obviously Adama Traore's got a bit of history at the Etihad. And then he came back and said, yes, Adama Traore strikes fear into the heart of every City fan. He obviously had that very famous goal that he scored. I think he may have got 2 goals when Wolves went and won their 2-0, that's about 3 or 4 seasons ago now. But he just said a good transition team against Manchester City plus Adama Traore. He was like, he was also like, yeah, obviously City have got the tools to win this game comfortably as well. But he was like, I'm a little bit nervous, and he's very rarely nervous. It's quite a cool position to be in.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's Adama Traore, fast man, given lots of space. I mean, that's the outcome here, right? So let's see how that plays out. It's still Man City. I think in one way with City, the fact that they've lost Rodri and like how much of an impact that is, I know Rodri's had a lot of praise, but I still don't feel like he gets the true recognition for how important he has been. I mean, when City came to Craven Cottage at the back end of last season, and the way they just sort of clicked through the gears and just took the game, it was like Fulham didn't have the chance to play. And you had Rodri, swanning around in the centre of the field, didn't really seem to be breaking sweat, but just completely controlling everything, with his shorts tucked in, everything. Just like this guy is running the ship. And obviously Phil Foden got all the plaudits for last season. He was fantastic, but Rodri for me was their key player, and it's going to take them a couple of games to just sort of readjust, because they will readjust and they will come again stronger. That's what Pep Guardiola teams do, and they will cope. But if you want to play them and you want to get a result, it is in that aftermath of this sort of figuring out period, which they are still in. So, yeah, I think there's hope. But having watched Fulham play City so many times now, you fear. You do fear. I mean, the last year's visit, I'm thinking about that, was back in August time. It was just after the transfer window shut and Palhinha was unavailable. And there was that offside goal. Was it the Nathan Ake one?
Yeah, it was a Kanji.
Akanji, yes, but it was Ake who was offside, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was inexplicably not ruled out. So hopefully the officials are switched on for this one. But that was a tight game. That first 35 minutes was pretty tight. The second half, obviously, things opened up a bit, and with Fulham chasing the game. And I think if Fulham can keep it tight, can do what other teams have done, like Brentford or Ipswich, like strike them early, it keeps you in the game for much longer, and that gives you every hope. But it's just I don't want to say.
It's just the record against. It's the record against them, isn't it? And the weird thing I've always felt, Jack, is we go into a game against Arsenal. Even now, if let's say we were away at the Emirates on Saturday, and there's no right to feel like this, or Liverpool for that matter, I'd be going into that game feeling like, oh, come on, Fulham, we can 10%, we can do this today. A bit like we went to the Emirates last season and just grabbed a draw. We could upset them, and there's this weird thing about City. I mean, the reason is because
they've won 4 Premier League titles in a row. They've lost about 6 games in the last 10
16 consecutive losses to them as well just has that effect. But realistically, I mean, if this game was at home, I would be like, oh, come on, we can have it. Because it's at the Etihad, I still think that even getting a draw is incredibly unlikely. But yeah, if you could cherry pick a time to play them, I don't think I'm jinxing anything to say that if you could hand pick a time to play them, a game or two after they've lost their 2 best players is probably, and without Phil Foden scored last night, maybe getting a bit back to his best, but he's been struggling a bit this season. This is the time to play them.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think you're absolutely right. Like the chances of Fulham coming out of this with anything are still extremely low. Nothing we're saying, none of that hope, that optimism that I was talking about changes that, right? It's still, this is a less than 5% chance of Fulham coming out of the Etihad with anything. But I think that's higher than I would have put it, at the start of the season. And so there's something in that. As you say, there is these moments. And you said at the top that you thought, you're sad this isn't on Super Sunday. And I know you were kind of just referencing it as a joke, but I'm not. I'm really glad this is a Saturday 3 p.m. kickoff. Because I feel like there's probably a sense that if City were on the box, if this was a 12:30, they're under that pressure. There is something about not being in that maybe just is like, do they take their eye off the ball? Probably not. But actually just sort of being lost in the malaise of 7 kickoffs at the same time and that. You think about the Wolves loss last season, which just was randomly there. You think about the Brentford, the Crystal Palace loss. The Brentford one, I think, actually was at 12:30, but the Crystal Palace loss 2 seasons ago, where everyone was like, "What is going on?" Palace have just beaten Man City. I think Andros Townsend scored a screamer. But you kind of look at all these and you think, well, that's when maybe the eye is slightly off the ball. They've had a trip to Bratislava in midweek. Okay, it was light work, but equally, it's still travelling to and from Bratislava. It's not ideal in terms of prep. Maybe all of that gives Fulham a snowball's chance in hell, but still a puncher's chance.
Yeah, I just think it's one of those interesting ones. I mean, do we expect any changes here? Peter, he's been so steadfast with this lineup, and I guess the fact that there are no midweek games, and I'm still annoyed about it, but there are no midweek games for Fulham.
There wouldn't have been a midweek game this week, even if we were in the cup, so leave that out for
Okay,
now.
I get that, but we're just, you looked at the October fixture schedule for Fulham, I was like, 3 games, brilliant. That's really, I can't really getting my Fulham fix.
One of them's at City away.
Yeah. But anyway, I just be surprised. I feel like he's making a habit of doing the unchanged lineup. Why change a winning team? Surely.
Yeah, incredibly settled team with good options from the bench as well. So I'd be surprised if he does make any changes. I was trying to think because obviously we mentioned about midfield and think, well, when might be a good time to maybe bring in Sander Berg? But then I think when I've seen him, I don't think he's there. I think it's going to take a bit of time. I think before we see him play or start games, really, particularly on Lukic's form. Maybe a case for Harrison Reed in there, but would you take out Pereira? It's because it has felt. I mean, when we look at it, you think, gosh, it's such an attacking midfield that Silva has been setting up. And do you want to do that at Manchester City? But it's worked so far. But it's a different level now, isn't it? This is a different type of game you've got to be playing in, and whether you want to have, I suppose Pereira's off the ball stuff is actually what's appealed so much to Silva. But whether you actually rotate that, I'm not so sure. But you wouldn't want to change too much. You wouldn't want to take Adama out. You wouldn't want to take Kenny Tete out against likely Jeremy Doku, I imagine, depending on how they set up. The rest of the team kind of is picking itself at the moment. It's difficult for those not in the team, but it's a good place to be.
Yeah, 100%. One of the things I found really interesting and didn't really get to chat to this too much about after the Newcastle game was the way that Alex Iwobi tucked into the midfield against Newcastle to give Fulham a little bit more of an overload in there, 4v3 against that Newcastle midfield, which we talked about in the preview and discussed kind of that feeling that, wow, there's a lot of talent in there. There's a lot of physicality in there. Are they going to overwhelm? Are they going to swarm Fulham through the middle? And what was interesting was watching Iwobi drift into that area in order to actually make sure that Fulham had the numbers there. I would expect something very, very similar in this game.
A box shape, right?
To create the box.
That box before, yeah. That was, that's exactly, I think that's what they did when Fulham won at United last season. that was really apparent, because obviously Man United just leave oceans of space in the centre of the pitch. Fulham just took full advantage. It was, I mean, they still do it, don't they, Man United? That's a different podcast. But yeah, I agree. I think that's exactly it, and that's probably a good way to try and unsettle a midfield that, as we were talking about, isn't fully settled at City. I mean, it's Man City. When I say they're not fully settled, it's all relative, right?
Gundogan and Kovacic is probably right.
Yeah.
Although I didn't think, Gundogan had a couple of errors in him against Newcastle. Let's it's still Man City. One thing before we come on to some emails, I take it you both saw the Opta supercomputer prediction of Fulham's chances of winning the league. I mean, just so if you haven't seen this, basically Opta, and they do this all the time, they predict what percentage chance you have of winning the league. And Sky Sports in their graphic did the top 6 clubs. So City were on something like 73%. I think Liverpool were on 9%, Arsenal were on 12%. It had Chelsea on 0.1, Villa was on 0.06, and then just Fulham on a flat 0. It just felt so unnecessary to put us in the graphic.
It's a drive-by. Like, it's an actual genuine drive-by on Fulham. Like, why didn't they just put the top 5 in? Like, it's not like if they'd put Fulham in there and they'd also put in teams in 7th and 8th and they had points on the board, then fair enough, because you're like, well, you have to put them in because otherwise you can't exclude. But they didn't need to. They could have just done the top 5. Like... Anyway.
Yeah, why have they done the 6? Also, if you're going to put them in, maybe just actually show what the percentage is, because it can't be absolutely 0. Like, surely there's more of a curiosity about what it is. It's impossible. Like 0.001 or whatever. Just really double down on it if you're going to do it. But
yeah, as you say, I think a drive-by is the ultimate description of it. It just genuinely, I was chuckling for days when I saw that. Thank you very much, Sky Sports. Let's come on to some emails. I've got lots of good ones. This one from Peter O'Connor says, "Dear Fulhamish, was going to ask this after Man City away, but we're in too good a place now for me not to ask it. 6 games in, with the league starting to show some form and settle out, would anyone like to look ahead and see if you can see a managerial scalp in our fixtures over the next few months? We all remember Villa at home season before last and the murmurings of discontent we have caused elsewhere, but if there was one game in the next couple of months where we could bring about a change for another team in the league, okay, realistically, November, Pep and Emery are probably safe. Yes, I think they probably are. Who would it be?"
Ollie Glasner, Palace, 9th of November. They won't sack him. But, I mean, if he loses all 3 games before that and they lose again, Palace are really, really in a funny place right now. That's one to keep an eye on. Gary O'Neill at Wolves, 23rd of November.
Yeah, I was November. He could strike again.
I don't know if he'll last until the 23rd of November if they carry on their current form. I reckon he's got 2 or 3 games max, especially with the international break.
21st December, Russell Martin at Southampton.
No, surely that'll get done. Do you think? I mean,
speaks really well, Russell Martin. I got to give him some credit. And he came out and was just like, "I'm really hurt by my players." I was like, "That's so good." Yeah. I really enjoyed it on Monday night. And I was like, he's not wrong about any of it either. He was like, "I don't mind us getting outplayed. Like, we can get outplayed. We've come up from the Championship." He's like, "But just no desire, no effort whatsoever." I was like, "That's a stinger. That's a real stinger."
I actually think Palace is the one. As you say, I don't think they would sack Glasner, but it's just before the international break, which is often a time where if clubs are going to make a change, they would. I can't believe that would happen. If we did cost Gary O'Neill his job after Wolves, the game after the last international break, that would be incredibly stupid.
Yes, that's a fair point. That's a fair point.
I loved that run that we had, didn't we? Because we played, I think, Villa, Everton and Leeds, I think, in 3 consecutive games that first season we came off, as we did cost Gerrard?
Yeah, Gerrard.
His job at Villa. I was like, was it David Gerrard? It's been so long ago now. And we possibly could have cost Jesse Marsh's job at Leeds, but they actually stuck with him after
one more game, I think.
And Frank Lampard was at Everton. I think long term we'd seen, we might get Frank Lampard sacked, but I think they had a weird renaissance in form around that time. So we weren't the team. I mean, that was always coming.
Yeah, at some point.
It's Frank Lampard.
When was Graham Potter? Was that last season?
The Graham Potter double where we managed to beat him at Brighton, then he lost, and then he beat him with Chelsea as well was really quite special.
It took a little bit longer though, I think, for him actually to get the heave-ho after.
No, 100%. But we beat him in consecutive games with two different teams, which is quite cool.
Yeah.
That's a quite cool one. I like that one.
There'll be one. But it's hard to predict, isn't it? And I think at the moment, everyone feels quite stable-ish. In their job. It used to feel like by now you'd have some sort of Premier League sacking.
Lopetegui in November would have been a nice one. I would have liked that.
Yeah.
My personal vendetta against Julian Lopetegui continues.
This one from Nathan Wrigglesworth says, "Hi Fulhamish team, long-time listener, first-time emailer." We sound the bell. "I have a question that it would be good to hear your views on. Why do you think people are so critical of one of our most important players in Alex Iwobi? He's a talented footballer with the ball at his feet, creative with a good footballing brain, links up superbly with ESR and is a great team player. Keep up the good work. Love all the analysis and various ramblings on all things Fulham." I don't feel like he comes up for too much criticism, Jack.
No, I was about to say, there is a bit of grumbling when Iwobi loses the ball at the Cottage sometimes, but not like hugely more than anyone else. I think sometimes Alex Iwobi frustrates and delights in equal measure. He's a little bit mercurial at times, and occasionally you'll see him like burst through three players, and then the next 5 minutes you'll see him miss a very simple pass to set someone away, and everyone will be like, what's he doing? So I can see why that idea might circulate, but I've never really heard any sustained criticism from Iwobi for like regular periods of time in the same way that someone like Andreas does. Like, those two people don't exist in the same plane, I think, in the kind of wider Fulham fan base.
Yeah.
He's more of a facilitator this season, isn't he? If you think about his role, as in, whereas, Willian would directly run games, but he's sort of he's bringing the best out of Smith Rowe, allowing him to run in that left side channel when he wants to. Obviously, he moves infield and allows Robinson for the overlap. You kind of feel like he's really important, but also he's not like centre stage. Does that make sense? That's kind of how I've seen him when I've watched games. I think he's been fine, but
it's very trendy, isn't it, to talk about starters and finishers, I know, these days in football. But it does feel to me that Iwobi feels like a starter. He feels like someone who's got exceptional touch, exceptional poise, brings other players in. But probably, like, you've got Reece Nelson on the bench and other options as well. We talked about potentially Cess being a great option if you need a goal, just for his great ability within the box. He feels like a perfect person to start. And also, I feel like he kind of fills the Willian void a little bit in the fact that he's got such a good touch and he allows Robinson to come into the game. I mean, at the moment, the left-hand side doesn't feel like Fulham's most potent side. It feels like a switch from last season, where actually the right now feels a little bit more exciting.
Sure, but there's the two dynamics, right? There's the old Adama, Kenny Tete kind of partnership going down one wing, which is incredibly like useful. But the guile of the left wing remains. Yes, Anthony Robinson is still kind of the runner in there, but it's the way that Iwobi and ESR switch roles. And they often will just drift in and out of each other, and suddenly you'll see Iwobi pop up in the 10, and then the next moment ESR will be out on the wing, and they'll reverse again. That partnership and kind of the fact that they just dovetail so beautifully together, I think makes that left wing a real genuine threat that people are having to double treble up on. And then that's opening up gaps for Adama on the other side. And if Adama's getting double trebled up on the right, then suddenly Iwobi and Smith Rowe have space to exploit. And I think we saw that in its full glory against Newcastle.
No, I think we've seen just on that point, some slight subtle changes in build-up. And I think, there's definitely been more on the right. And I think for 2 seasons now, it's always felt like the right was chopping and changing so much. Think about the players who played in front of Timothy Castagna last season and that right centre mid role. But that's been way more stable. But then also on the left, it's happened a couple of times in terms of patterns of play where Fulham will look to build in the right-hand side with Pereira a little bit deeper. And then Traore, yes, he can run in behind, but he also can run diagonally. And those diagonal runs are so disruptive. They allow space for Smith Rowe and for Iwobi, and then often you'll get Iwobi taking the ball, and then Robinson, and a lot of the attack seem to finish on that left-hand side, but they're starting a lot more on the right, whereas we've seen previously it was sort of the inverse. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah.
So I think that's quite an interesting little development, and that's a lot to do with the profiles of the players too, isn't it?
I think maybe it was last time Peter was here, we were talking about potential acronyms. We wanted like the Fulham equivalent of MSN.
Right.
Our right-hand side, so our right centre-back, our right back, and our right winger, AT&T.
Right. Okay.
So I'm bending. It's not really a side, is it, to include Anderson? But they're the right side players.
Yeah, I mean, it does nominally work.
I don't think it's going to catch on, is it?
No, probably not. Like, unless we start seeing things where
you could include Andreas into that as well if he ever drifts over. To the
right,
right.
okay, that's probably more likely in terms of actually the way that the combinations are going to work. Although I was thinking, are you looking at an Anderson diagonal, Adama running onto it, and Kenny Tete coming in to finish the business? That's an AT&T goal.
Yeah, lovely.
I'd be very surprised if we see that goal this season.
Yeah. We are not sponsored by them, by the way. I just enjoy.
Well done, though. It's good to think about acronyms. It's important.
Yeah, always good to get the acronyms in. This one, I think, I'm not sure if he really intended this to be read on the pod, but I kind of like it anyway, because I'm sure there's people listening that might have the same question. Hi, can you guys get tickets to away games? I'd attend most games in and around the Midlands. Great work on the podcasts. Keep it up, from Jack. I guess get a membership?
Yeah, that would be my guess. I can't imagine we sell out all of our games in the Midlands.
Well, I was going to say, if you want to go on Saturday to the Etihad, I don't think it'd be too difficult.
No, so I think membership, like tickets will drift down for most of those games to membership level. You'd imagine Villa away.
Or Villa away, we never sell out. We always struggle, I think. So
Villa away, Wolves away.
We never sell out Wolves.
No, I think you'd be able to be fine with a membership on those ones. So yeah, 100%.
Grab a membership and go. I'd be amazed if it's that difficult to get one. The London aways, that is,
yeah, and like Bournemouth, etc. There are some tricky games to get away tickets to unless you are very, very pointed up. But I don't think you would need to struggle too hard for a ticket to Wolves or Aston Villa.
Yeah. A couple more emails, slightly more serious. This one, anonymous. They wanted to say, wanted to message you in regards to the ticket price posts. My son's local grassroots football club have been given hundreds of tickets for both the West Ham and Newcastle games, so the club is clearly struggling to sell out them. They are tickets for the Riverside stand as well. I'm a season ticket holder myself. As I say, wanted to remain anonymous as I didn't want my son's grassroots team to see the post and possibly ruin their relationship with Fulham, but happy for you to post this information. It's not something that's a massive shock. No. I always say in this situation, I think it's great that we're giving out tickets to local grassroots.
100%.
Just not because we can't sell out the games.
Yeah, like it's obviously, and look, I've been banging on about this and the importance of keeping especially child's ticket prices down, because it allows you, and we used to do that kids for £1 and stuff, and bringing people into the club who might not elsewise have come to the cottage and making them fall in love with it is part of raising a new generation. So I'm absolutely on board with the club pouring tickets into the grassroots level clubs. And look, I'm sure they would make an argument to say that actually they'd specified for this, right? And they'd actually already set tickets aside for this. But if that's the case, then I'm sure we'll see the same amount of tickets being given for Man United at home and Man City at home and Liverpool at home. But I don't think that will be the case. So at that point, you kind of look at it and think, well, what's the kind of basis of this? Is it just Fulham are trying to get bodies on seats? Or is this a kind of an initiative in order to bring young people into the club, which is a good initiative and Fulham should be well behind and well on board with. So it's a bit of a hard one to sort of sit and criticise. I think that on paper, that's a really, really good thing that we're doing this and bringing youngsters in who are playing football, who clearly have an interest in the game, and bringing them to the cottage to try and, generate that next generation of fans. But I kind of want it to be seen as something that they can do there for, every game, that there is relationships built on a constant basis, not just on the games that Fulham are struggling to sell out.
Yeah. And I felt like we did mention about how the Leicester game at the beginning of the season was good value. It massively went the other way for the West Ham and Newcastle games, and both games did not sell out. Yeah. It was £71 to sit in most areas of the Hammersmith end for both those games. I mean, that is still pretty astonishingly bad. And
I bought 2 tickets for a couple of friends travelling over from Ireland for the West Ham game, and yeah, that was pretty much what I paid for them.
Yeah, it's pretty eye-watering. The final one from Hugo. Hi Fulhamish, after hearing the horrible accusations and watching the recent documentary about our former owner Mohammed Al Fayed, who personally changed the Fulham badge at the start of his tenure, I believe next season, should we revert to the old badge? This will show that Fulham no longer wants to be associated with Al Fayed. What are your thoughts? I personally think this is a bit of a stretch to associate it with him.
I don't think we should revert to the old badge. Much as I love the old badge, I think that there is something said about building a badge that kids can draw, that people can, push on when they're trying to build things and paint things. I think all of that is about brand, not recognition, but actually kind of finding
Simplicity.
a way to get with it, right? And actually to bring that into people's lives. And the old badge was incredibly difficult to draw, like really hard.
Yeah.
I am not averse to changing the badge. I'm not. I'm averse to changing the badge back to the one that it was before. But I think there are plenty of us. I've always liked the monogram. I think the monogram's really smart and the way that worked. And clearly the club have tried to push that into the new badge at some point. I don't think we necessarily need to change the badge because of this. But if that is a reason that Fulham can go and, do something different. The problem is, Fulham design a new badge. I guarantee you it will be one of these same circles that everybody else has.
Do not bring a circle. I do not want a circle.
But then again, I really like the circle badge on some of the old kits, the old school circle badges. But we just know that that's not going to be the case. I struggle with this one. I don't know enough about design, marketing and branding to understand exactly how you design a successful badge and what makes that. I think that the club have had this current iteration of the badge for clearly some time. And I think that it's quite well associated with the club now. I probably wouldn't shift away from it unless people spoke out and thought that was something that Fulham actually really did need to do in order to move away.
Yeah, I hear the argument, and I know that he was a big part of that change to the current badge, but I don't know where it stops if you suddenly associate him. And we haven't talked about the documentary really at all on the podcast. I don't think there's an awful lot to say. I wrote an article about it on the Fulhamish website, and I was really glad that there's been very few, if any, chance. There was a kind of small murmuring of one at Newcastle, but it got shushed out very quickly. And I think, in all honesty, those that started it maybe didn't even realise that it was actually it had him in the words. So I think that's good. Peter also wrote an article about it on the Athletic as well. So we'll link to both of those in the description of this podcast, because in all honesty, the documentary is horrific.
Yeah,
there is just no other words to say about it. And I'm glad that so far as a fan base, it's not easy to change habits that have been going for 25, 30 years, especially when there are two, arguably three chants sung every single game that mention his name. And so far it's been an exemplary kind of take up of not taking it up, really.
How we change that, move forward is the next step. But for now, I think that this is probably the best way that we can be.
Yeah, exactly. Right, let's move on to a fun note to end the podcast with, because we have, this will catch on. Jack, you're going to love this. I haven't listened to this myself in anticipation of how good I think it will be. It's from your old friend, Ishan Mahadir.
Yes, come on.
So Ishan wrote, I dreamed a dream.
He did. I dreamed a dream.
And he is back. And I say, I haven't listened to this, so I have no idea what to expect. But Yasmin, who's on the buttons, you've listened to this and it's good. You haven't listened to either.
No.
We're all going free.
We're all going for this together. Peter, are you ready?
I'm tuned in. Yeah, let's go.
Okay, so Ishan says, hi team. I was very happy to be a one-hit wonder, and maybe I will stay that way. But I couldn't resist. Here's another. Best wishes from Ishan. All I know is that it's for Reece Nelson. That's all I know. Hit it.
He almost joined the Tractors, but he's a real stand-up guy. Born in Elephant and Castle, South London's Memphis Depay. I promise you that he's different, and Marco will reignite his flame. He's had a tough time at Arsenal, been there since he was small. Wenger showed him the way through and Emery shut the door. His second name is Nelson, and we'll call him Admiral. Oh yeah. Reese, Reese, Reese in black and white. Reese, 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 please tell me, Tony Khan, there's an option to buy. Cause Ipswich is one thing and Arsenal's another, but he chose the cottage. Take that, motherfuckers. Oh yeah. Reese, Reese, Reese. Willian was our hero, Robe is now on the left. Forget about Harry Wilson, now we've got a Dahmer's chest. It's a pretty good selection, but Reece Nelson is the best. Oh yeah.
This is exceptional.
Reese, Reese, Reese in black and white.
I love that line.
So good.
Reese, 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 please tell me, Tony Khan, there's an option to buy. Cause heartbreak is something I felt with Aloni. Anderson almost killed me, damn it, Tony. Oh yeah. Reese, Reese, Reese. Some people said that we were stupid buying Arsenal's academy. But now we've the vibiest team in the whole damn Premier League. Reese, 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 Reese. Nelson.
Oh, that's brilliant. So that song's Please, Please, Please by Sabrina Carpenter, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh my word.
I mean, it's on point. Like, it's relevant. It's all, I mean, exceptional.
It's phenomenal effort,
I
that,
didn't know
isn't it?
where
Oh,
that was
my.
going so many times.
Kept me guessing it. Every bridge, every verse.
turn.
There were so
And
many
now we're going to have
turns.
to put an explicit mark on this episode.
Worth it. If your kids were listening, I'm sure they'll understand.
That was wild.
I loved it.
Fantastic. Isham, you make my life.
Is he now, can he now remove the one-hit wonder tag from his name?
From my perspective, yes. I mean, I don't know if that's going to have quite the same emotional appeal as something like a Tim Ream song would. But maybe toward the end of the season, we will be. Maybe we'll all be singing Reese, Reese, Reese. I mean, sensational. I had no idea where he was going with that, and it turned out beautifully.
One thing I'm a little bit upset about. So Elizabeth Barnard listened to that beforehand, and she was like, you've got to play this. And she was looking through the emails. And she said, I don't want to ruin it by telling you what it is, but she said, it's a bit of a modern song, so you might not know it. I was like, I'm 32. I was only working for Radio 1 a couple of years ago, but clearly my years must be...
You're Radio 2 boy now, mate.
Yeah, flipping out. And I was thinking, what song could it be? I thought maybe it'd be something really obscure. It's flipping Sabrina Carpenter.
So she doesn't know what your listening habits are at home. Maybe she thinks you're still there listening to, Pink Floyd and stuff.
I'm really upset. But she wasn't joking either. I think she was genuinely, seriously worrying that I wouldn't know what it was.
I don't know if they've released that on tape cassette. I don't know why I'm giving you so much shit about a year younger than you.
God, that's the only thing. When it came out, I was like...
Retirement soon, mate. Someone else is going to have to take over.
Yeah, Yasmin, you can host the show next week. That'll do for the podcast today. I'm off for a warm bath and a cup of Horlicks.
Get the pipe and slippers out, mate.
Peter, thank you.
No, thanks for having me, guys. We'll see you again soon.
Jack, thank you.
It hath been a pleasure.
Samuel. You're on the podcast on Sunday.
I am, yeah. Hosting duties on a Sunday. It's rare, but I'm excited about it.
Well, it'll be exceptionally exciting when we've won 3-0 at the Etihad.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Can't wait to talk about it.
So, win or draw at the Etihad, listen to Jack on the podcast alongside a stellar lineup. Have a lovely weekend, whatever you're doing. If you're heading to City, safe travels. If you're watching from home, enjoy anyway. And we will be back with the Thursday Club next week. Come on, you Whites.
You Whites.